is good evening. Tonight, we begin with a battle that has become both a sobering case study and a defining inflection point of this war. Pokrovsk is what Moscow proclaimed as its most complete victory of the winter, has, in the space of a week, begun unraveling into something far more consequential. The first major Russian strategic defeat of 2026 masked, unsuccessfully, by an avalanche of propaganda and doctored battlefield footage. On paper, Russia announced triumph. In practice, Ukraine orchestrated a trap so deliberate, so data-driven, that the Russian armed forces managed to defeat themselves inside it. The Kremlin's narrative of inevitable victory is fracturing, and the cost, in men, material, and political credibility, has been cataclysmic. On January 12th, Russian state television aired jubilant footage, troops hoisting flags, liberated civilians, and slow-motion shots of armor rolling through smoking ruins. The headline, from AF Channel 1 to RT-Zar, was identical: Pokrovsk secured, strategic corridor complete. But as those images aired, independent satellite feeds from Planet Labs and Maxar exposed an altogether different landscape. Hundreds of destroyed armored vehicles clustered in semicircular kill zones, burn patterns consistent with precision HIMARS fire, and, crucially, no evidence of sustained Russian logistical presences inside the city perimeter. It is the new physics of warfare. Reality on the ground versus the narrative online. And in Pokrovsk, the reality hit Moscow like a returning missile. The Kremlin's storyline was simple. After a 6-month push through eastern Donetsk, Russian forces encircled Pokrovsk and forced Ukrainian withdrawal. That story was, in fact, written before the operation concluded, crafted as a guarantee of victory necessary for President Putin's annual address. But inside Ukraine's General Staff headquarters in Kyiv, the same assumed victory was being used as bait. Ukrainian intelligence had mapped the Russian uptick in propaganda preparation and realized the offensive's timing was political, not strategic. Their solution was elegant and ruthless. 1. Invite the offensive to control its pace. S3, purchase cut its fuel and perception simultaneously accessible. Pokrovsk is not a metropolis. It's a medium-sized logistics junction sitting astride 2 rail spurs and the highway artery linking Kostiantynivka to the western Donbas. Military cartographers call it a choke point masquerading as a fortress. Russian planning assumed Ukraine would defend the city block by block, an attritional grinder favorable to Moscow's numerical advantage. Instead, Ukraine's new doctrine, refined since 2025, turned Pokrovsk into a Vars 3 layered crucible, an electromagnetic ambush, a fuel starvation zone, and a precision trap, but before Russia's armor even began its advance. Ukrainian electronic warfare brigades, operating near Seladov, activated what soldiers call the blackout. Using domestically designed NOTA systems blended with USD-supplied Corvus jammers, they targeted the frequencies normally used by Russian reconnaissance drones, particularly the Zayla 4260E and Orlan Henders. Within 3 hours of the offensive commencement, Russian commanders lost live video feeds over nearly 400 square kilometers. Communication traffic intercepted later indicated units were advancing blind, and as requesting coordinates from civilian radio signals, a form of battlefield desperation unseen since early 2022. In the language of soldiers, they were driving forward into radar fog. Every Soviet-derived attack plan still hinges on a central principle: there is always more fuel. Ukraine has spent the last year disproving that assumption. Through reconnaissance drones and human intelligence, Ukrainian planners identified the 3 logistical arteries feeding fuel tankers into the Pokrovsk corridor. Instead of targeting the tanks, they hit the WAV choke points, culverts, narrow bends, and overpasses. On day 2, Russian convoy commanders discovered not destroyed cities, but destroyed bridges wars behind them. Dozens of tanks advanced 6 miles beyond their refueling radius and stopped. Ukrainian infantry quickly renamed those vehicles metal bunkers with no door out. Local commanders laughed darkly. Every Russian battalion tactical group came with its own museum exhibit. By day 4, Ukraine claimed to have destroyed or stranded 87 logistic vehicles. Without diesel, Russia's offensive momentum was an illusion maintained only by press releases. Once electronic and logistical paralysis set in, the counteroffensive unfolded less like a charge and more like an algorithm. Ukrainian artillery, guided by real-time drone feeds immune to Russian jamming, created floating fire grids. Each grid automatically assigned new priority targets as Russian units tried to maneuver. FPV drone swarms, built for about 800 apiece in improvised workshops, attacked at a cost-exchange ratio estimated at 1 in 120 against Russian main battle tanks. Within 24 hours, nearly 2 full Russian battalions were either captured or decimated. No retreat order was successfully transmitted because, ironically, the radio frequencies reserved for fallback commands were the very ones jammed first. An entire mechanized assault had, in effect, walked into a mathematical equation designed for its elimination. State television celebrated Pokrovsk's liberation. But buried in Russian regional obituaries and telegram morning channels was the silent arithmetic of failure. OSR 9,000 personnel confirmed lost in the first wave, according to Western intercepts. Russian military bloggers, traditionally loyal, began referring to it as Pokrovskaya Mezdra, the Pokrovsk flaying. Perhaps the most chilling measure came not from Ukraine, but from the Russian payroll system itself. Investigators from Novaya Gazeta Europe uncovered a 300% spike in death benefit disbursements from Rostov Oblast between January 13-19. Each payment corresponded not to victory but to vacuum. Inside the Kremlin, this was supposed to be the offensive that bolstered legitimacy ahead of spring elections. Instead, it has triggered the familiar autocratic reflex purge, deflect, spin. TASS Purges reports suggest at least 2 senior officers from the Southern Military District were relieved of command within 48 hours. Operational incompetence, said the Defense Ministry. In private, blame was directed at the radio-electronic troops who failed to anticipate foreign algorithms. Translation, the EW units became the scapegoats. Deflect, the Russian television has pivoted hard to what propagandists are calling the symbolic victory narrative. Yes, they concede losses were heavy, but Pokrovsk was secured, flags were raised, and moral courage triumphed. They highlight human heroism to blur structural negligence. Every tank destroyed is now a martyr of modernization. ISAC's spin to global audiences, Moscow presents Pokrovsk as a Pyrrhic success comparable to Stalingrad's early reverses. A narrative of sacrifice preceding inevitable ascendancy. The cognitive choreography is identical to past state crises reframe disaster as destiny. But narrative control does not refill fuel tanks. The Pokrovsk fiasco revealed a deeper strain inside Russia's war economy. Namely, says the replacement spiral replaced destroyed material so fast that production quality collapses. Estimates from the London-based Center for Economic Warfare suggest that between replacement armor, UAVs, and compensation payments, Azars, the total post-Pokrovsk burden may exceed a $10 billion sack. Russia's drone replenishment program is in chaos. Many of the microchips required for new Zalo drones were sourced via long supply chains running through Kazakhstan and the UAE. Western export controls now strangle those routes, forcing Moscow to use inferior Chinese alternatives. As drones fail and spare parts dwindle, the paradox deepens. Each attempt to modernize fighting capacity drains the same treasury needed to fund the propaganda of victory. Inflation inside Russia is hovering near 18%, an uncomfortable number the finance ministry attributes to seasonal volatility. Ordinary Russians call it the Pokrovsk tax. For Kiev, Pokrovsk was not just battlefield success. It became evidence of adaptation outpacing mass competencies. The Ukrainian armed forces demonstrated that smaller, smarter systems can dismantle large formations when intelligence and mobility align. This psychological reversal weighs heavily on Russian morale. Calibration. Each strike in Pokrovsk was preceded by weeks of simulation, mapping, and algorithmic modeling with Western partners. It was the synthesis of academic research and battlefield pragmatism. Our credibility. For Ukraine's allies, Pokrovsk validated continued aid. A senior NATO defense official told reporters confidentially, "Pokrovsk is our laboratory confirmation that smart assistance yields exponential results." Ukraine's parliament responded symbolically, naming February 1st Day of Adaptive Defense, a nod to the philosophy that outthinking can sometimes outweigh outfighting. To rest NATO within days, Brussels circulated a classified review titled Pokrovsk Implications for Forward Defense. It recommends doubling shipments of mobile EW platforms, citing the city as definitive proof that jamming capacity equals firepower. Several allies are already accelerating production of counter-drone interceptors. China observers in Beijing have analyzed Pokrovsk with forensic interest. Military bloggers aligned with the People's Liberation Army warn that the disaster highlights vulnerabilities similar to any potential cross-strait logistics operation. As one commentator put it bluntly, a modern fleet can drown in electromagnetic silence before it meets an enemy. As the global South, thus, nations long sympathetic to Russian narratives are recalibrating. South African and Brazilian commanders invited Ukrainian EW specialists for closed-door briefings last week, an unmistakable diplomatic signal that the myth of Russian invincibility has expired. Every analytic layer risks burying the human element beneath acronyms. But inside Pokrovsk, the human story is the true through line. A Ukrainian signal operator named Olena described monitoring the radio spectrum during the operation tour. First, their chatter was constant. Commands, noise, shouting. Then only silence. For hours we heard nothing, like they vanished inside their own transmission fog. That silence encapsulates modern warfare's cruelty, the instant when thousands of men cease being soldiers and become statistics because electrons betray them. On the Russian side, captured conscripts recounted realizing they were surrounded only when their own wounded stopped crying for evacuation. No vehicles arrived. One said, "Our maps were right, but the world wasn't matching them anymore." Pokrovsk transformed modern doctrines into ghost stories. Ukraine calls the Pokrovsk response a layered denial matrix. Western analysts call it the future of combat. Regardless of vocabulary, the essentials are clear. 1. The electronic warfare is no longer a support function, it is the battlefield itself. Whoever controls the signal corridor writes the reality of war. 2. Logistics and data are a single organism. Destroy the servers or destroy the tankers. The effect is identical movement dies. 3. Cheap, numerous, semi-autonomous drones outperform legacy armor. Access Pokrovsk outcome rewrites procurement priorities from Washington to Warsaw. 4. As propaganda collapses when numbers become undeniable. 6. When even authoritarian control cannot forever disguise the arithmetic of failure. 2. Within the Russian commentariat, those still brave enough to speak, Pokrovsk has reopened existential debates. If Russia cannot hold Pokrovsk, how can it claim inevitability in this war? Economic elites, alarmed by new budget reallocations, are pressing quietly for negotiation. Regional governors facing deficit spikes whisper about voluntary demobilization programs. It is the slowest, most dangerous moment for any autocracy. The moment when belief erodes faster than fear replenishes it. Western intelligence notes unusual troop rotations. Elite VDV airborne brigades being pulled deeper into rear areas under pretext of retraining. More likely, it's a shuffling to prevent mutinous contagion. Pokrovsk didn't just crush a division, it infected the chain of command with disbelief. 2. We have seen battles before that historians later identify as the beginning of the end. Kana, DNB, and Putet, Kharkiv. Each combined tactical brilliance by the underdog with overconfidence from the aggressor. Pokrovsk fits this lineage perfectly. For Moscow, it represents the collision of 20th century doctrine with 21st century improvisation. For Ukraine, it is proof that adversity can be transformed into algorithm. And for the wider world, it is a case study in how wars of mass are giving way to wars of mesh networks, where code, bandwidth, and data literacy outweigh brute tonnage. Tonight, Russian news anchors are still reading from the same teleprompter, Pokrovsk under full control. They show parade footage filmed nowhere near Donetsk. They interview soldiers whose uniforms still have shipping creases. But even their viewers know a strange truth. Every time the regime insists it has secured victory, yet another victory becomes unsecured elsewhere. Docs in war, repetition without credibility becomes confession. Two sources inside Ukraine's defense ministry hint that the Pokrovsk methodology, triple-layer disruption followed by surgical counterstrike, is being adapted for other sectors. The codename floating through Ukrainian social media is Axe Mirror Front. The essence, wherever Russia sees its own reflection, a symmetrical fight. Ukraine turns the mirror into a trap. The country's defense industry now produces over X-3000 tactical drones monthly, almost all integrated into universal targeting networks. Every electrician, coder, and mechanic seems to double as an armament artisan. That self-made resilience is the shadow character of this entire story, a nation surviving through creativity. Two think tanks are already staging panels titled The Pokrovsk Paradigm. Policy analysts debate what it means for NATO budgeting, for Taiwan's defense, for the ethics of drone warfare. Pokrovsk has become less an event than a reference point, proof that tactical adaptation equals strategic leverage. Financial markets have even assigned it an acronyms, PFX, Pokrovsk effect, to denote the short-term boost in Western defense equities following successful Ukrainian operations. It is grim but telling. Innovation born of survival now drives global economics. There, beyond geopolitics, there is an ethical resonance to Pokrovsk. It refutes the fatalism that size and brutality always prevail. It reminds observers that thinking, yes, simply thinking, remains a weapon. When engineers in basement workshops build drones from household batteries, when EW operators outsmart systems costing millions, when journalists expose false victories, each is a line of resistance carved in intellect rather than metal. Pokrovsk, for all its devastation, stands as evidence that conscience and competence can coexist on the same battlefield. 2. Every war leaves a signature sound. For Pokrovsk, that sound is the static hiss of radios searching empty frequencies, proof of an army broadcasting into nothing. Ukraine's victory here was not measured by territory gained, but by the decibel of Russian silence. As one Ukrainian colonel summarized, they spoke louder than ever before they lost, and quieter than ever after. Due to, if the first years of this war were fought on social media and maps, this next phase returns to an older currency, credibility. The Kremlin's grand promise of triumphant inevitability now reads as an IOU it cannot repay. Each declared conquest becomes a potential autopsy. Meanwhile, Ukraine's strategy of small data, big defiance continues converting statistical precision into national endurance. Pokrovsk may one day appear in military academies as a technical case study. But for now, in the present tense of world politics, it is also a mirror, showing every government, democratic or autocratic, what happens when belief collides with evidence. 2. Good evening once again. Pokrovsk was meant to be Russia's proof of momentum. Instead, it became Ukraine's proof that momentum without clarity is just velocity toward collapse. The battle illustrates the enduring law of modern conflict. Information does not just describe reality. It creates it. And tonight, the reality is clear enough that even the loudest propaganda cannot drown it out. This has been Pokrovsk Strikes Back. Ukraine exposes Russia's hollow victory claims. 6E data is still being parsed. Human stories are still emerging. But one fact already holds. In Pokrovsk, truth staged its counteroffensive and won. Good night.